Hello, nice to meet you. This is Kim Ki-won from Richgo. I was looking at the YouTube comments and I noticed some discussions. These days the real estate market is declining again, and they say they are going to release another 55 trillion won in policy loans. People are wondering if this will lead to another rise in housing prices. So I organized some related information. First, let's take a look at the related news article. It says that while they are claiming to control household debt next year, they are also planning to release another 55 trillion won in policy loans. This doesn't make sense. They say they want to control household debt, but then they release more loans. So, many people seem to be worried that this might stimulate housing prices again. Now, regarding the scale of 55 trillion won, it is equivalent to the supply level for 2024. So, they released 55 trillion won this year, and they plan to release another 55 trillion won in 2025 as well. As you can see here, it consists of products like the stepping stone loan for home purchases and the buffer loan for Jeonsi. The problem is that it will be difficult to achieve the household debt management goals without reducing the supply of policy loans. So, as you can see here, there is a target for managing the increase or decrease of household loans next year. The policy loans are currently at 40 trillion won, and private loans are at 45 trillion won. So the total household loan limit is approximately 85 trillion won. So, as you can see here, the issue is that the financial authorities' policy is to limit the annual growth rate of total household debt, which includes both policy loans and private loans, to within the level of nominal growth. So, the total increase in loans for next year, which combines policy loans and private loans, is supposed to be limited to around 85 trillion won. Considering the repayment of the new policy loan supply scale of 55 trillion won for next year, if we estimate about 70% of the supply amount based on the remaining balance, it comes to around 40 trillion won. And the remaining increase in private loans needs to be capped at below 4.5 trillion won. However, the increase in household loans recorded the largest scale ever, with the increase in bank mortgage loans alone reaching 46 trillion won by September of this year. 2024, so it needs to be capped at below 45 trillion won, but private loans reached 46 trillion won by September 2024. What does that mean? Ultimately, the accessibility of loans may not improve next year, because private loans need to be reduced now, right? So, if we don't adjust the supply of policy loans now, strong regulations to curb private loans will inevitably continue next year, which is the general perspective of the financial sector. So, the real estate policy funds are tightening. Then, the interest rate for the stepping stone support loan is a maximum of 0.4% increase. Such articles also came out not long ago. Now, regarding house prices, when asked if they are rising because of these policy loans, the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport made the following statement. So, houses that can be purchased with policy funds, right? I mean, you can't buy houses worth 1 billion or 2 billion won with policy funds. So, looking at the houses that can be purchased with policy funds and the current price range of popular areas, it is difficult to see policy loans as a direct cause of rising housing prices. This is what has been said. So, I looked for related reporters, and it turns out that 70% of this year's mortgage loans were policy loans. So what was it? That more than 2/3 of this year's mortgage loans was policy loans. Ultimately, it seems certain that this is a side effect of real estate speculation. So, if you look at this article from the end of August, it mentions that issues arose due to household debt, and belatedly, a war on household debt was declared, tightening bank loans comprehensively. But what is the real culprit that caused the surge in loans? It's the government's policy loans. So, what do these details indicate? It means that there was no quick response due to discord among the ministries. In other words, the statements here and there are different, and their stances are somewhat... They were different, ministry. So, if you look here, this is the data up to July. The entire mortgage loans are in grey, and the policy loans are in red. The total mortgage loans up to July were about 32.1 trillion won, and the policy loans were about 22.3 trillion won. What's that mean? Approximately 69.5% or about 70% of the mortgage loans have now been executed as policy loans. Especially in January this year, there was a new policy. It allows loans of up to 500 million won at a maximum interest rate of 1% for homes valued at 900 million won or less. This is a very favorable condition for newlyweds or younger individuals looking to buy their first home. Next, the stepping stone loan targets couples with a combined annual income of 85 million won or less. This income limit is quite low. It would be better to increase it because 85 million won is roughly the annual salary of someone who has just started their career. Therefore, the stepping stone loan offers interest rates of 2 to 3% for first-time homebuyers with an income below 85 million won. So, these special cases like the new policy and stepping stone loans are mostly categorized as policy loans. So, since the interest rates are about 2 to 3 percentage points lower than the market mortgage loans, what does that mean? This is why it was bound to gain popularity, and it is analyzed that this contributed to the rise in housing prices. Consequently, some discussions about government accountability have emerged. However, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport said the rise in housing prices is not a trend. We talked about this, and on August 11th, we lowered the policy loan interest rate, but now the financial authorities are pressuring banks to raise the interest rate burden on the 5 major banks by 20. There were 2 instances in life. After that, the gap between policy loans and interest rates widened. The stress DSR was originally set to be implemented in July, but it was postponed to September. What happened then? In July, the increase in policy loans reached a peak. Therefore, responses varied slightly depending on the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport and the financial authorities. It seems that cooperation within the government regarding these policy loans will not be easy in the future. The financial authorities have stated that if household debt is not controlled, even after the introduction of the stress DSR in September, they will apply DSR to policy loans. However, this has not been perfectly coordinated with the Ministry of Land. And what does the Ministry of Land say? They mention that whether to apply DSR to policy loans like the stepping stone and support loans is a matter of the ministry's stance. It seems that there are slightly differing voices among the departments. Next, there is a more detailed analysis, which is that 60% of real estate transactions in Seoul were for switching properties. After analyzing it, and what is it? Policy loans have sparked this switching. Therefore, they have become a catalyst for the overall rise in real estate prices in Seoul. This is what is being discussed now. So here you can see the proportion of real estate disposal amounts among the switching transactions in Seoul. So if you look at it, transactions over 500 million won account for 56.7%. Those over 700 million won for about 37.5%. And those over 1 billion won for nearly 20%. Considering these factors, we can interpret that there were quite a few transactions in Seoul and the metropolitan area where apartments priced above 800 million won in Seoul and around 560 million won in the metropolitan area were sold and switched. And this shows the proportion of real estate disposal amounts among switching transactions by district in Seoul. The darker the color, the higher the amounts of 500 million, 700 million and 1 billion won. As you can see, in the case of Mapo-gu, 63% are above 500 million won and about 19% are above 1 billion won. In Yangcheon-gu, around 66% are above 500 million won, while Seocho-gu exceeds 76%, Gangnam-gu exceeds 79%, Songpa-gu is at 65%, and Gangdong-gu is also over 60%. Still, the proportion is quite significant. So, what this means is that the homes that can be purchased with policy loans are not that expensive. Therefore, the purchase of apartments in relatively affordable areas has increased first. Since policy loans are provided, people have bought cheaper apartments with this, and if someone has bought, it means someone else has sold. So, the person living there sold their house and used the proceeds as a down payment for a loan to switch to a more expensive property. So, this means moving from lower tier to mid-tier properties, then selling again, to move from mid-tier to higher tier properties, and then selling again, to move to premium properties. Thus, the demand for a single solid property has gradually shifted. This is the analysis being conducted. And here, if you look from January 29 to July 31, the new baby loans amounted to 22.52 trillion won, of which about 43 trillion won was used for purchases excluding Johns. Nearly half, 46.5% of the applicants, bought homes in the metropolitan area. Now, if you look here, there is data showing the distribution of loan amounts as a proportion of home prices by range. In the case of Gyeongno-gu, 37.8% of people received loans of over 50%, 21.8% received loans of over 60%, and there are also those who received loans of over 70%.
Exceeds 8.
So, if you go to areas like Junggu, Yongsan-gu, Songdong-gu, and Gangjin-gu, the rates aren't that high. Now, take a look at places like Nodogwang or Seongbuk-gu.
What about Seongbuk-gu now?
The percentage of people who have taken out more than 70% in loans is currently 11.7%. Next, in Gangbuk-gu, it's 14.5%. In Dobong-gu, it's 10.4%. And in Nowon-gu, it's 10.17%.
So what does that mean?
In areas where housing prices are relatively low, the proportion of people who have taken out more than 70% in loans is quite high. Yes, this is clearly visible, right? In the case of Gangseo-gu, it's over 10%. And in Guro-gu, it's 11.7%.
That much?
Gumcheong-gu is also over 16%. So it seems that Gumcheong-gu has the highest percentage right now, while Gwanak-gu is at 13.8%.
It's about that.
So the higher the housing prices, the more people are really going for over 70% loans. We can confirm through the data that the proportion of those who have really taken out large loans is quite significant. So, as the government allowed exceptions to loan regulations for policy loans, there have been increasing cases of people buying homes recklessly. As a result, when housing prices rose, the demand for switching to other areas spread. And this is the analysis that has been made.
What is it?
It is necessary to adhere to the principle that policy loans should only be borrowed to the extent that one can repay them. It means that lending, without considering the ability to repay, can lead to serious problems later on. So, let me summarize. It is said that 55 trillion won will be released in policy funds in 2025, which is the same level as 2024. However, it seems that strict loan regulations to suppress private lending will continue. Due to these factors, there is a possibility that policy loans could trigger a chain reaction of demand for switching. But the key point is, what is it? So, will policy funds rise again in 2025? That's what we're worried about, and it's what we want to know. Now, let me ask you, is it still possible to get policy loans? It is possible, right? But why are transactions decreasing now, causing the rise to halt? In the case of Jont's prices, they are falling in almost all areas of the metropolitan area. Why is this happening in September and October? This means that loans are still available. So what does this imply? The market is not determined solely by policy funds. There are factors that are much more important than these funds. Therefore, thinking that the market will rise again just because the government is releasing 55 trillion won in policy funds seems unreasonable. I can conclude that, so, these policy funds will be released and they may stimulate some demand for switching. However, will this lead to an overall increase in the market from here?
This is not easy.
I think this is quite close to being impossible. If you like today's content, I would appreciate it if you could like and subscribe.
Thank you.